Maggie Smith, who doesn't really need too much introduction. She is our creative writer convener, a founder member of Dulwich District U3A, and very active in U3A overall for many years. Since she reached her 90th birthday on the 10th of February, she's become something of a minor celebrity in the area, and Dulwich Diverter interviewed her last week, and the article is going to appear in the Dulwich Diverter on the 5th of May. So I'm sure we'll be all on the lookout to pick up copies of that paper. So Maggie, without further ado, can I hand over to you for your task of introducing Jenny, please?
Yes, thank you. When I invited Jenny last autumn, because these have to be done in advance, we had these wonderful ideas that this would be done in the gardens of Bell House and that we would be real people. And then, of course, lockdown came. So we're now doing it on Zoom, but we're in for a treat. We have a very modest young woman here. I met Jenny at Bell House. I did run one-day workshops at Bell House on personal stories, which were prose, and Jenny came to one of them. I didn't know until I met her months later at a poetry session that she was in, that she was also a poet who was already winning prizes. And you've read, I hope, all the forward about her, but I'm going to ask Jenny in a minute to tell us a bit about herself and what is behind her writing. So, and then there's going to be a pause for questions after every poem. Also, people will want to applaud. Please don't applaud until the whole thing's finished, partly because it'll take time. But if you want to ask a question, if you can put it in the chat or hold your hand up, I'll do my best to look round and pick someone. That's a short time after every poem and then longer after the final poem. And as I say, Jenny is not only winning prizes, but she had no idea when I first invited her that today was going to be the launch of her new collection of poems called Map of a Plantation. And there is going to be a list. I think Neil's got one. Neil's done wonders with the screen share of all the local bookshops where you can buy this book, because you obviously can't get them off Zoom at the moment. So Jenny, over to you. Let's hear a bit about you before you start.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everybody. I'd just like to say an enormous thank you to Maggie for inviting me to take part, and also to Neil for working so hard with all of the technical kind of behind the scenes stuff. He's done amazing work with the poems, and to thank Angela for the introduction, and to thank really everybody for showing up today. I really do appreciate it. As Maggie said, I'm a poet. I've been writing for a number of years. I always wanted to be a poet. Today is publication day of my new collection. It's my second collection called Map of a Plantation. And my first collection, my debut, is called Her Lost Language. I'll be reading 3 poems from Her Lost Language and then 2 poems from Map of a Plantation. First of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and how I became a writer. As Maggie said, I'll do a poem and then there'll be time for questions, and then I'll do another poem. So all in all, I'll do 5, and hopefully that won't be too many. I was born in Paddington, brought up in Kilburn, and educated in Kilburn, and have lived in the country really all of my life, apart from a short time spent traveling in Africa. And I went through 9 countries on my own, which was very challenging, but also really helped me to grow up. I mean, this was when I was a lot younger, helped me to grow up. And I write really about legacies of British transatlantic enslavement. It's a history that fascinates me because of my family heritage, but also because I think that we can see it being played out, the legacies are being played out even today in terms of the issues that we still have around race and around division. And I think they're issues that perhaps should have been sorted out quite a long time ago, but they're still having this terrible impact. I really write because I want to find ways for all of us to talk about this very emotive history in a way that allows us some healing and some space. So my work tends to be, although I think it has an edge, it tends not to be too confrontational. And I love to perform my work. That's something that I've really missed because of COVID. And I love to connect with people through the work. The first collection, Her Lost Language, is really about the impact of the legacies of enslavement on a particular family. And part of it is my family, and part of it is an imaginary family. With Map of a Plantation, I decided to go back even further, and it's set on a Jamaican cane estate, and I'm attempting to give voice to enslaved people as well as enslavers, really to think about how those two very different groups of people live together and how it must have felt to be, or how it might have felt to actually be an enslaver. I'm very interested in how that would impact your emotions and your heart and your ability to relate to other people. I think that's all I'll say for the moment about myself. I'm really open to questions, and perhaps, Neil, we could have the first poem, if that's okay. Right, so this poem is called The Seamstress. It's from my first collection, Her Lost Language, and it's really in honor of my maternal grandmother, who was, she never came to this country, she was in Jamaica. So I'll read this for you. The Seamstress, for my maternal grandmother. I'll be the dress she never owned, immaculate for special days, the only burden heavy frills and English lace along the hem. I'll never trail in dirt or suffer dust from cane fields. My heart will burst to make a bodice stitched with bold Jamaican flowers, yellow orchids, red hibiscus. There will be a giant fern appliqued on the back, my ribcage open to its full extent. I'll raise my chin to form the high, firm collar, a throat so elegant, with space to hold my voice. I'll ask her what she really wants, plain cuff or golden buttons. Underneath the dress, I'll make myself silk underwear, a soft and pretty petticoat. Its one equivalent will be her newly coddled skin. My feet will form such dainty shoes, and she will go like Cinderella to the ball. But if she doesn't want the prince this time, she'll dance away without a care. The English lace will shimmer as she moves.
Okay, Jenny, sorry, that was lovely. Can I ask, I haven't got a poetic bone in my body, how do you come up with an idea like that to say the things you said?
It's really strange. I think you can't really plan as such. You can hope, and I do sit down and every morning and try to write, but it really is inspiration. But something may just come out of the air, and an idea. I can be listening to the radio. I mean, that poem, I can't remember how I started it, but it might have been as simple as something on the radio about a dress, and that would just spark an idea, and then you take it from there. And if you're lucky, then the whole poem will kind of flow, and then you work on it over time. But sometimes you'll just get a line, and then you can use that at another time, and you can come back to it. But there really isn't any kind of magic formula, unfortunately. It's all a question of luck in a way.
And skill.
Rona, yes.
That was lovely, Jenny. Did your maternal grandmother know that you were writing a poem for her?
Oh, no. She passed away a very long time ago. In fact, I never met her.
But you knew she was a seamstress, did you?
No, it was really just about knowing that she came from a very poor background indeed. Right.
Mhm.
And I know that she worked very hard. And as we know, women in the past did quite a lot of physical labor. We kind of forget how, you know, tough it was for women before, you know, all the mod cons and whatnot. And she had lots and lots of children. So, you know, I knew that her life was very tough. And I just wanted to make a poem that was really a gift to her, if you know what I mean.
It's lovely. Did she ever leave Jamaica? Do you know?
No.
Mhm. Well,
you.
thank you for sharing that.
Valerie, was I right in thinking you had a question? No.
I just
Oh,
I wanted to make an observation. I remember
okay.
in my childhood, um, anything from England was so precious.
Right,
I caught the bit about the English lace in the bottom,
right.
and everybody was so proud that there was a bit of lace. Or
Absolutely. That's a complete connection. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Brilliant. Yes, England, the mother country, obviously had a lot of, you know, really, real importance
of
to
course,
people in the Caribbean and in other countries.
yes.
There was a lot of a real sense of respect and
Oh,
deference
yes.
towards this country. Yes, very much so. And in a way, her lost language talks about that, but also talks about the shock of coming here and realizing that it wasn't quite the same as in the books. Thank you so much. Sarah.
Talking of, I rather read the English lace in the opposite way, and I don't know whether I was right, that it was something of a burden, that the English were responsible really for her being in Jamaica in the, you know, going back a long way. And that might not be altogether positive.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I think that's one of the things about poetry is that in a very short space, you can have more than one meaning. And it really is up to the reader to decide. I think that's great. That's another layer, you know, that you're adding to it. And that's really fantastic. So thank you for that. Shall I do the second poem?
Yes.
This is also from her lost language. And this is from my brother. Black men should wear colour. I mean an orange coat, sunlight dripping down the sleeves, a yellow shirt to clash with bright blue trousers, taking inspiration from the most translucent sea. Pink leather shoes, fuchsia might be best, to contrast with brown skin. Red socks should add some warmth, so long as they're the only flames to ever touch your feet. A tie could be mistaken for a noose, unless you choose a rainbow swirling on your chest. It will help to show the heart has all the colours in the world. Walk down any street with head held high. I will wave my colours back and we'll both be safe.
Well, I know I've said it before, and I just love the way you use colour. It makes me shiver, that one. It's so gorgeous.
Thank you. Again, that's from her lost language, and I was interested in, obviously at that time, really looking at clothes. And I think I was interested in looking at clothes because of, you know, the layers that we put on, the identities that we can assume. And as I said to Maggie and Neil, I just remember looking out of my window. I live in Brixton, and I remember looking out of the window and just seeing lots of young black men all dressed in black, and remembering my travels in Africa where African men wear the most beautiful colours, like the pink and the, you know, the fuchsia, the blue, the translucent colours, and just what a contrast it seemed to me. And it made me feel really sad to think that in a way these colours, to wear black all the time is kind of hiding the self. And understanding why black men might feel safer to do that, to kind of try to blend in, but also that black is the colour of mourning, or traditionally the colour of mourning. And it just made me feel quite sad, that idea that you almost have to shroud yourself in order to feel safe. There's a book called The Lonely Londoners by Sam Selvon, which you're nodding, Pam, so you know it, where he talks about black people coming to this country in the 50s and how sometimes they were mocked for wearing such bright colours. And I just thought, what a contrast to today, really, that those colours seem to have been taken away. So I wanted to write a poem for black men, which was trying to give them back that colour, but with the understanding of why they might feel unable to wear it, basically.
Yes, I really like that image of all those colours. I like colours myself, but wouldn't quite be brave enough to wear all those colours at once. I just wondered if your brother took your advice.
It was really for all black men. It was brothers in the bigger sense of the word, really. But yes. It reminds me to wear colour, so I think that's really important.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know, I can't see everybody, so I don't know if there are any more questions.
Yes, it's not as much a question, well, it is a question, because I'd like a copy of that poem, and I'll explain why. It's because I call my family a London family, because I've got, my eldest son is married to a Portuguese, my middle son to a girl from Lewisham, and my youngest son is married to a Hindu who who was born in Trinidad.
Right.
My granddaughter of that, her partner is black. His parents actually came from somewhere, I think it was Jamaica, I'm not too sure. He is now a barrister. What I'd like to do is to show him a copy of your poem and then tell him that that's how he's being told to dress as a barrister.
Well, the poem is in her lost language.
Okay.
And there are,
it's very interesting.
there are copies in all the Dulwich bookshops.
It's very interesting what you say, though, about your family really holding so many different cultural backgrounds.
Europe,
because
Portugal,
I think that's more and more common.
It's a London family,
a London family, absolutely, So no, really, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
But I'd love to see his face when he saw.
I know
in a court.
I know that the poem was used by a teacher in school, and that the young black boys felt that I was telling them what to do, and I really wasn't. I was just kind of trying to offer, you know, something, you know, with love, basically. But thank you. Are there any more questions?
A couple of times now, because I saw it elsewhere, and I find the line where you go from advising the red socks to saying, as long as that's not the only red to touch your feet, very moving and very shocking, and it seems to delineate the poem. We're going through a nice idea of people being proud and happy and wearing colours, and then we come into this very dark area, and I just find that very moving. I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up, and I think that's something that people notice either the first or second time, that there are references that are, as it were, darker. So that the reference which might make some people think about the history of lynching with the noose around the neck and the fires burning under the feet. And these are really, you know, quite shocking. And I think my poetry tends to do that. in a more subtle way. I don't want to hit people between the eyes as such, but thank you for saying that, yeah, because that's a really important part of the poem. It's not just a sentimental view. There's a whole history there.
The colours reminded me of kente cloth from Ghana.
Ah,
all the different, layers of colours all joined together.
yes,
That's
yes.
lovely. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for that. This is another one from Her Lost Language, and again, it's about clothes. So you can see there was a real theme, and this one is called Song for a Former Slave. Her dress is made of music, humming through the hem, high notes in the themes. A rousing hymn adorns the bodice with sheer lace. The heart is stitched with loud amen. The back a curving shape of hallelujahs. She's proud enough to hold her own applause tucked in a pleated waist. The skirt sways freely when she walks to show there are no chains. Her dress is made of music. Maggie.
Yeah. Did you decide on the metaphor before you start to write it? Because you've gone all the way through it using similes and metaphor about the dress itself. And again, it's just, she is beautiful too. I know Neil, I think Neil found the picture, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
Lovely.
Brilliant picture.
Yes.
I wrote that poem actually in a workshop, and it was called Music and the Mind. And so we were listening to a lot of music, obviously, and it was classical music. And again, I wanted to write something that was a gift. And as I said to Pam, it sort of just came to me really. And this idea of the joy of being free after being enslaved, and how that could be suggested with the music.
I'm sort of struck by the recurring theme of textiles in all your poems. So that's obviously something from your heritage. You're talking about your grandmother and her sewing skills, but is it something that you get involved in as well? Do you work with textiles at all?
Not on a practical level, but I do colour heal. So I use colour in the way that I dress as a sort of expression of emotion, and as a way of, you wake up in the morning and I think of a colour that kind of tries to express how I'm feeling on that day. So I work with the chakras as well, and the chakras have got colours associated with them, and the most sort of well-known colour, I guess, is green for the heart. So I think about colour in that way, and it's really, really important to me to have colour in my life. And yeah, as I say, to express it, and also having spent time in Africa and seeing the way that, African women would dress up and they would have the bag to match the shoes and little things like that, which I think, just give you a lift when you might not be feeling all that great. And I try in winter not to go into black and grey and brown, because it's too easy to do. I try to be a bit more conscious about colour. Yeah, thank you very much. And in fact, I read that poem at an event where there was poetry and music mixed together. So it was really inspired by the actual workshop that we were doing. From my latest collection, Map of a Plantation, they've got a very different feel to them. I will say, first of all, that there's a swear word in this poem, so I hope I don't offend anybody. And I'm going to take this opportunity to point out the illustrations that Neil found, because I think he's done a fantastic job with all of the illustrations that he was able to source. Really, really fantastic. So, as I said at the beginning, I wanted to think about how it must have felt for enslavers, so for white people who were actually enslaving black people. What I think sometimes happens with the history is it tends to be called black history, but actually there were other people involved. And I think it is it's a horrible shared history, but I think it is a shared history. And in the collection, there's a section about a so-called slave owner, and this is a poem after his death, The Late Master. Some say he was a ravening bird who feasted on the bodies of his slaves. The truth is more prosaic. A stooped and shuffling man, prematurely grey. His clothes just never seemed to fit. He suffered with his feet, both bunions and corns. Sleep disturbed towards the end. He rose before the cock began to crow. The nurse, who cared for him, laughed. There were bottles everywhere. He wet himself at night, mattress rank with piss. Some say he's gone to hell. Well, yes, if hell is 6 feet underground in a small teak box. He chose that wood because it withstands termites.
May I ask you a question, Jenny?
Of course.
It was interesting. I read your interview in the newspaper about your latest poems, and you make a reference to the amount of money that was paid to the slave traders at the time. You had quite strong feelings about that, didn't you?
Yes. Neil's talking about, and I think he's talking about an article that I wrote in the Morning Star that came out on Saturday. And I did about 5 years of research into the history of transatlantic enslavement, British transatlantic enslavement. And I learned a lot, and it was a very, it was a difficult thing to do, to actually do the research, but it really helped to ground me in this country. Because as I said, I was born here, but being black, you sometimes do get the feeling that you're not that welcome from some people. And reading about the history really just made me feel that I did belong actually here, that the history gave me a right to be here. And one of the things I learned was that, you know, we're taught that the slaves were freed because of people like Wilberforce, but the history is much more complicated. And one of the things that, I'm sure some of you know this already, one of the things that happened was the white people in the Caribbean who owned slaves were very reluctant to give them up, even though the slaves were constantly rebelling and resisting. And in fact, the British government was afraid that there would be a war in Jamaica, which is something we never learn about. They were afraid that there was going to be a war because the enslaved people were just so angry all the time about their situation. And so one of the things that happened was taxpayers in this country were actually made to pay £20 million to the white slave owners so that they would give up owning slaves. And at the time, £20 million would be the equivalent of £20 billion now. So the slave owners were paid, but the enslaved people weren't given any money at all. They weren't given anywhere to live, they weren't given any land. So they had no choice but to stay on the plantations and continue to do the same work. But the only difference was they were paid a pittance. And then the British government brought in indentured workers from India and China, who then took most of the work, which meant that you had the majority population of black people who were made unemployed. And it's because of this history that when people had the chance in the 20th century to come to this country to work, the young people flocked to come to this country because there was really nothing for them to do in the Caribbean. And then you get the Windrush generation. So I think you can really see that there was a clear path from enslavement through abolition through to the Windrush and where we are now. And one of the things with the Windrush that lots of people take issue with is that people in this country, the indigenous population, weren't given any kind of warning or background about what was going to happen. So you can understand that they were far from pleased because there was this influx of people. So it set up a conflict, unfortunately, that is still being played out, you know. So the history, knowing the history, I think, is a really important thing. Thank you for that, Neil. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Sorry again. I was just going to say, adding to the history, if anyone's interested. First of all, I think that money that was paid to the slave owners was only paid off comparatively recently. I mean, those of us who are old and have been paying taxes all our life have probably paid some of that money.
Right.
And if you want to find out about who the money was paid to and so on, and this is approaching it from the other end, University College London, UCL, has a huge website which is open to public. You can use it, and you can find out all the families to whom these vast amounts of money were paid, and which of course set them up really for 20th century success or 21st century. It's quite interesting.
Very.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That's a brilliant note. And that's a fantastic resource. So yeah, no, it's fascinating. But one of the things that's really interesting is looking at the fact that actually quite a few people that you wouldn't think would own slaves were absentee landlords. And it was something that people did, and Valerie's nodding, so I'm, you know, it's one of the things that people had, you know, that you might have a woman in this country who owned 1 or 2 or 3 slaves. And one of the things that I didn't follow it up, but in my own family, the slave owners, there was a female slave owner in Jamaica, which I just, you know, you never really hear about that there were women in Jamaica who owned slaves. So it's a very interesting history. Thank you so much for that, Sarah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting poem, and the context is really good. And I would confirm that the payments have only just been paid off about 2 years ago. So I never knew that. So that's very interesting. On the actual poem itself, it's quite an interesting and sad character which you actually portray, and quite a miserable life that seems to be being led. And I was wondering whether that person was like a slave manager working for an owner, or whether you envisaged it as a slave manager who himself was caught in the system, or whether they were a slave owner, and how you saw that person as either partly to a certain extent a victim as well as the slaves, or not.
Great question. Thank you so much for that. Yes, part of what came out of my research is that the white people in and my research is really specifically Jamaica, because that's my family background. That the white people in Jamaica were living in fear because there were these constant uprisings. I mean, the enslaved people were doing all sorts of things. They were putting poison in food. They were running away. They were burning down houses. You know, it was a very violent society because slavery is not easy. It's not easy to enslave people, and the white owners were also, I believe, how could you not suffer under that system? We all have hearts. We're all human, and it's going to take its toll if you oppress another. What you do to another, you do to yourself ultimately. And that's really what I wanted the poem to say, that this was a haunted human being. As far as that's my interpretation. And some people might think that's being a bit lenient, you know. But we're not only all human, we are actually one. And if, as I say, you hurt someone else, you really do hurt yourself. So that's where I was coming from. And I do have, for want of a better word, I do have compassion, because it was a system and it was state sanctioned. And that's not to excuse the violence. It's just to try and rise above it. You know what I mean? Does that answer your question? There was somebody else with their hand up.
I'm glad you've just said that, actually, because looking at that picture, that poem, which I found very moving, I thought it could be put into another context. It could be called The Old Man Living Down the Street, because what you have described there is an old man working in a way that he doesn't want to work at, I don't know, but and suffering from all the sort of problems that we all suffer from in old age when it's all too much. So it's a very human poem, and it's something about being aware all people are human, whether they're estate managers or whether they are just ordinary people living down the road.
Right. Thank you for that. Yes, and I think that's where I'm trying to come from. I don't want to excuse violence, but I do want to try and understand it. And one of the things that really helped me with the research, because I did it for so long, I moved through real rage into something else, into another place. And I think what I'm trying to do with the map of the plantation is talk about the violence, talk about the pain, but also talk about humanity, as you say. Yes. And thank you so much for that. There was somebody else with their hand up. I can't remember.
See Valerie Reed I've got.
Yeah.
Sorry, Valerie. Took me a while. Can you unmute, please?
Yes, thank you. Two things, really. I want to say I thought it was a really powerful poem, because the fact that you made us think about the white master or whatever he was. He had all that power, but by giving him humanity, it reminds you of how this violence and the horror of slavery was visited on by other people. He's not just a sort of abstract figure. Makes you think about him, and therefore somehow you can't just skip over him when you're thinking about how awful slavery was. So in a way, it gives power to the situation. And just the other observation was when Sarah was saying how pervasive all the compensation and things were made to the previous owners. I come from a little bit Yorkshire, and my nephew is a historian. I think he probably went on the UCL site, and he discovered that the previous lords of the manor in this little East Yorkshire village actually had big estates in Jamaica, and were profiting all the time from all the revenues, and they got compensated. And it just makes you think how pervasive slavery was all around the UK and around the world too. But so there's probably not many that have got have had land and things like that then that weren't somehow profiting in some way from slavery, I think, which is very it's quite interesting.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And I think that's an excellent point, that it was so pervasive. I mean, you can see it in street names, can't you? You can, Black Boy pubs and all these different sorts of names that are very, very common. But yeah, the absentee landlord system, as I understand it, was really, very, very huge. So you had lots of people living here who had estates in Jamaica, and they never actually saw the violence. They were run by other people. And so they could just go to sleep at night, really believing that what they were doing was giving people work. and it was actually called Sacred Hunger. That being part of the slave trade was a sacred hunger to make money, to do well, and there was that cut-off. And I think in America, why up until quite recently, a lot of the work around enslavement, you know, like with Toni Morrison, was to do with the fact that enslaved people actually went to America. And I think it would be very different if people in the Caribbean had actually been working in this country. It would be a very different country. But because it was off, you know, across the sea, the Caribbean Sea. Yeah, so it could be something that people were a little bit blind to. But thank you for that, Valerie. So much for those questions. I'm just going to do an observation. The observations were great because I've learned a lot, in fact, about the compensation system. You know, the fact that it's only just really recently been paid off. That's a really interesting thing, and I did not know that. So thank you. And I'm going to read this final poem, which is also from Map of a Plantation, as well as talking about enslaved people and enslavers. I also have a very short section which brings us to the modern day, which is really almost from my point of view. And this poem won a prize, so I was really, really happy about that. It was winner of the Ariamati Prize, which is for poems that promote peace and social change. And I wanted to think about slavery, or as it were, emancipation, that's not just about being free physically, but some sort of freedom of the mind as well. So it's called Imagining a Forest Made of Freedom. Imagining a forest made of freedom. They're bubbling, black roots reforming, pushing at the soil. Bones, misshapen with slave labour, straighten and grow strong, ripping through the ground. Fractures caused by beating to fuse, shape young trees, swelling to enormous trunks, fed with blood unjustly spilt. Wealth, deep planted by a whip, design a hardy bark. Starvation in reverse makes fertile leaves wave, carefree at last. If anybody's got any questions, or whether Neil or Maggie would like to ask me anything.
To say almost the same thing, that one of the things about poetry is that if it's really good, it leaves you silent and you need to read it several times, and maybe you don't want to discuss it because you're so moved. And I thought it was such a beautiful tribute to the sort of fitting end to a lovely afternoon. But maybe somebody does have something to ask.
Just wanted to comment on the language and the use of ripping and the energy that conveys. It's really good. The roots are coming through, and it's a very visual thing.
Thank you. Yes, I do like to draw pictures if I can. You know, using colour, using these particular images that yeah, make you think of the physical. But also I wrote that poem because it's really important. I mean, I think that the earth and the land is something that is so important to all of us, especially at this time when there's so much danger. And I just wanted to make a connection between Black people and the land in a really positive way. And also because part of what happened in Jamaica is that people were enslaved to work the land. So the relationship with the land, you know, could be quite negative. And so I just wanted to reclaim it as something really positive. You know, I live in a flat, but I've got over 50 plants because it just means that much to me. And so I really just wanted to do something that was about being in the natural world. but that also encompass the history. So thank you for that.
No, I just love the energy, you know, that visual thing of ripping. It's
great.
very good.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny, for such a powerful poem.
I know, Martin.
It's made me think of the reparations movement in Africa, and that the effect of the slave trade was to remove a lot of working age adults from African society and take them to Jamaica, where in a sense they developed the land there and fertilized the soil with their bodies and also with the work that they did. And it made me think that those people, by being taken away from the society they were in, impoverished their societies back home. I don't know if you can see me. It's got the
I can.
The pictures. Yeah, fine. Thank you for very much.
That is an excellent point. Sorry, carry on.
And when you talked about people being impoverished by slavery and the wealth going to the slave owners in the compensation scheme for Britain, I'm aware that in America, when the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished there, the incoming president, because Lincoln was assassinated, gave pardons effectively to lots of the slave owners and let them reclaim their land. And that, for instance, in Georgia, where they grow Uncle Ben's rice, if you know that one, the slaves had taken those plantations for the rice growing, and they planted a new harvest themselves, and the American government, the northern troops who had been there to enforce the abolition of slavery, seized the land back from them and gave it back to the slave owners. They kept their wealth. So it sort of reinforces your point that if you are simply told you are no longer a slave, but you're given no compensation and no opportunities within the economic system, then you're really up against it.
You are, right.
And if I can just add a bit from my family history, my grandfather was a brown Jamaican. He came here in the 1890s to do medicine in University College Hospital. I don't know if we can see, there's a book about the family.
Wow.
When Banana was king, who was written by one of my black cousins, Leslie Goff, who's a journalist, lives in New Jersey. And he got the various family pictures, and there, if I can get it, I'm trying to see on the screen, there is my grandfather. And there is my great-grandmother, Margaret,
my God,
who was born a slave. She was born in 1830, and slavery wasn't fully abolished till 1838. But
in Jamaica?
In Jamaica. And her mother married the man called Clementson, who had been her slave owner. Though there were, of course, relationships between white slave owners and black women, very few were regularized by marriage. That meant that where there was a marriage, the children could inherit. So my great-grandmother inherited a plantation because she was the legitimate daughter of her father and her mother. And that meant the family had some money, which helped to educate my grandfather, his brothers and sisters, and funded my grandfather to come here as a student to do medicine here. He then stayed in this country. He married...
Martin, I'm going to stop you just because I would like to recommend to Pam and Angela that you do a talk, because that is absolutely fascinating and really, really important background history. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I just think it's really fascinating the way that these stories come out.
Yes.
You know, we pass each other on the street and we don't know each other, but there are all these connections and links.
Yes.
So thank you so much for that. That's really, really interesting. I think that I've written down the name of that book because I'm going to try and have a read of that, because that sounds, I've got the name already, When Banana Was King, Leslie Goff. So I'm going to check that out. But thank you so much. You said so much that I can't even think of how to answer what you're saying because there was so much there. But yes, these stories of enslaved women marrying their masters are people of history, and their children being manumitted, so being given their freedom, is a very important part of the history, very important. So thank you so much for sharing that. Pam, yes, we've got time, I think maybe time for 3 more questions, if that's okay.
This will be very quick, I think. Am I right in having read that poem as that it is hopeful? It's
Very,
hopeful.
very. I'm an optimist. I really believe in the future. I know that it seems bleak, and I'm probably silly to have that belief, but I do believe in the future. I do believe that now is a time where there is great change. There's a lot of chaos, and a lot of violence, but I do think that there is definitely a time for change, definitely. Anyone else?
To ask you whether your parents spoke to you about, did they grow up in Jamaica?
My mother, yes, my mother's Jamaican. Not in a lot of detail. It's like, unfortunately, you know, some people, I don't want to say older generations, but some people want to forget. They don't necessarily want to bring up the past because it's like opening a can of worms. And also, I think, you know, she missed her family back home, so maybe not wanting to sort of dwell on the sadness. But you know, when you're a child, you listen, and you listen really hard, and you learn to pick up little bits here and there. So, and you can make a lot out of that, I think. Even if you're not given a lot of information, you can still make a lot out of it.
I went to visit my brother, who had got, in that time, it was thought as a wonderful job to get on a tea plantation. And I'm from Sri Lanka, by the way. So I was appalled at the way he was treating the people, the truckers, you know, I was a child. I was about 9 years old, and I was just shocked. And I think as a child, you don't talk about it. I never remember talking about it, even when I went back home, because my parents wouldn't have ever spoken like that or treated anybody the way they were doing. I mean, my brother was following what everybody else was doing.
That's one of the sad things. That's one of the sad things. I think that it unfortunately, the group mentality can take over, and the worst aspects of our humanity can come up. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Sarah, is there anybody, like one more person?
Yeah, I think Margot had a hand up. Yeah, Margot, if you unmute, thank you.
And then once we've had this, if Maggie wants to, we will hand back to Maggie, if that's okay.
How much I've enjoyed your session, and it was so full of joy. Those poems have such joy in them and compassion, as you say. So I was wondering if you do a lot of work in schools, because in some ways maybe it's the next generation they're going to have to do the emotional work that's involved in this whole area. So do you go into schools a lot? And I'm sure you do.
I don't. I used to, and I used to do a lot of work when it was the National Union of Teachers. I used to work with them, but it's very draining, and I'm taking care of myself. So I'm taking care of myself and I'm writing. But thank you very much for that question.
Said at the beginning, please don't applaud until the end. I think one or two of us might have enjoyed this afternoon. So would you like to say thank you in the normal way to Jenny?
Thank
you. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to say thank you again, especially to Maggie. I'm blowing you a kiss, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and I'm sure we haven't heard the last.
Great.
So, and
thank
I'm
you, everyone.
Over
thank you.
For the formal reply to
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.